So you can start. Great. Thanks so much. All right, welcome everyone to today's session number 2 of the Community Project Funding Cohort. This session will be on budget. And before we get started on the content for this session, I wanted to go over some logistics. So we do have everybody muted during the webinar, and that's just to make sure that we don't have any background noise and that everybody can focus their attention on the presentation. This PowerPoint presentation will be available on the HUD Exchange, and you can go to the cohort page and you will be able to find it there. You'll also be able to access it in Absorb. If you do have questions today, we really encourage folks to ask any questions that you have through the chat feature. Hopefully everyone's familiar with the chat feature on Zoom, but if you go to your main toolbar, you'll see a little bubble that looks like a speech bubble. You click on chat, and then you can enter your questions into the chat. Please ask all the questions you have. That's what we're here for. We're here to help you understand what's required when it comes to the budget as part of your application materials. So please go ahead and use that chat. You don't need to wait till the end of the presentation. As they come to mind, go ahead and drop them in. We'll be pausing throughout the presentation to see what questions have come through, and we will have a general question and answer session at the end as well. If we get questions that we can't answer today, or that we get so many questions that we just can't get through them all today, those questions will be logged and answered at a later date. So don't worry, we will get to all of them in time if we can't get to them today. So for today's agenda, we're going to start with some introductions in just a moment. We're going to do a cohort overview just to kind of talk about the cohort and where we are in the process. I'm going to give you a short recap of the narrative session, which was session number 1. And that session went over the details of what you need to put into your narrative. So just in case you missed that session, we will do a real quick overview just to reorient everybody. And then we'll jump into today's content, which is the budget. As part of the budget, we're going to be talking about both construction projects and non-construction projects. And we'll be talking about line items and determining the amounts of your budget for each of those types of projects. We'll also talk about budget amendments. That's often a question people have about what they do if their budget changes. We'll talk about that. And we will do just a really quick discussion about DRGR, because DRGR is going to be so crucial to managing your funds once everything's approved and you have access to them. And then at the end, we'll take some additional Q&A if we haven't already covered it throughout the presentation. And that will wrap up today's session. So introductions. My name is Jennifer Alpha. I'm with TDA Consulting. I've been working on the CPF cohorts, including the budget and the form session, which is session number 4 for both the first cohort and this cohort now. I also do a lot of work in a lot of the other HUD programs, and I've been with TDA for about 12 years. So Stan, I'm going to let you introduce yourself, and then we'll pass it over to our HUD guests.
All right, thank you, Jennifer. I'm Stan Fitterman. I've been working on affordable housing and community development programs for about 25 years. So yes, I started when I was 12. And I'm also going to be participating in the environmental review one as well. So I'll see y'all in 2 weeks also. And then Connor, I think I saw you jump in. There he is.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. My name is Connor LaRoe. I'm a program analyst with the Congressional Grants Division, which is, of course, the division that's administering all of these CPF awards. And more specifically, I'm working to help coordinate TA efforts like this, like the cohorts, to help all of you grantees get fully executed and successfully administer your CPF award. So we're really happy to have these cohorts and have you all attend, and really happy to have you all for the second budget session. So Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Connor. All right, and we'll move ahead. We would like to get to know you now. We're not going to take the time to go around the room. That would take probably the whole session. We've got a nice big group here of about 70 folks. So we're going to get to know you by doing a few polls. So I'm going to go ahead and launch our first poll. Stan, if you can let me know when you see that pop up.
Yep, it's there.
Great.
People are answering.
Excellent. So this poll question asks, where are you in the grant award process? Did you just get started to work on your application packet? Have you already submitted it, but you have been asked to make revisions? Or have you submitted it and you've worked through the process and now you're just waiting for your grant agreement? So we'll give folks a few more seconds to answer that question. It looks like most people who are probably going to answer have answered already. So we'll go ahead and see where we're at. All right, it looks like the majority of folks are still working on your application packet, which makes sense. That's why you're here in the cohort, so you can get information on how to complete the materials. But there are some of you who have already submitted materials, and we want to say congratulations on that. If you are in the process of revising, hopefully these sessions will help you understand a little bit better the revisions that are required. But thank you all for participating in that poll. All right. So we've got another poll question. Stop sharing that one and go to the second one. Oops. All right, second poll question.
No, there we go. It's up.
Great. Oh, wait a second. This is not the poll question we wanted. Sorry about that. Get rid of that one. So let's see if this is the right one. No, it looks like these questions are not quite the right questions, but that first question was the most important one. So we're going to go ahead and just go with that one. It really does help us understand where you're at in the process. So we're going to move forward with the slides. Appreciate everybody participating in that poll. So this poll, this slide is showing you the HUD Exchange website. So the HUD Exchange, for those of you who may not have already explored it, has a lot of really wonderful information about the CPF program, including a place where you can get additional program support. So if you have not explored the HUD Exchange, we really encourage you to look at that resource. You're going to find a lot of written guidance as well as videos and places where you can go to get additional direct assistance if you need it. Some of that direct assistance includes Ask a Question. The Ask a Question portal is something that actually exists for a range of HUD programs, including CPF. So if you have a question and you need sort of a quick answer, or it's a small question and it doesn't require a whole lot of case-specific analysis, you can submit it through the Ask a Question. That goes to an expert. Some of the questions will get funneled onto HUD. And so definitely use this as a resource if you do have an inquiry that you need to make. In addition to Ask a Question, you'll see here that there's a way to request in-depth assistance as well. And finally, we wanted to remind folks to sign up for the Mailing list. The mailing list is the way that you're going to get all the latest breaking news about the CPF program. So make sure that if you haven't already signed up for the mailing list, that you do. You can do that by going to the HUD Exchange and searching for the mailing list subscription page. And you want to make sure you sign up for the EDI-CPF listserv. All right, so let's give a quick overview of cohorts. So the purpose, of course, of this cohort program is to assist CPF grantees with the completion of the materials required for execution of your grant agreement and initiating your project. And hopefully by the time you work through the 4 sessions of the cohort, you'll have a better understanding of what's required as you complete those materials. The first session in this cohort series was the project narrative session. That session is already complete. We're going to do a quick recap of that in just a moment. Today, we're going to be talking all about budget. We have an office hours section that follows up on the conversations that we're going to have today, and that office hours session is on February 13th. We really encourage folks to attend that office hours session. That's where we can do some more exploration of your more specific questions. Today, we're going to be giving you the high-level overview along with some of the details, and then you can take those, apply them to your own projects, and come to office hours with any follow-up questions that you might have in applying the information that you learned today to your own work. So definitely mark your calendars for that office hours session. It's a way for you to really put this information to practice. After that, we have the environmental session, which you'll get to see Stan again at the environmental session, and then I'll be back for forms on March 5th, and that will conclude the cohort series. All right, so session 1 recap. In session 1, for those who may not have been able to join session 1, we did a narrative overview, and in that narrative overview, we looked at the project description. So looking at what needs to be included for your project name, the project address, the project purpose, and the project narrative. Keeping in mind that there's not a prescribed format for this narrative, but there is specific information that HUD will need to know in order to do a thorough review and approval. You want to make sure that you also include project metrics. Sorry, my mouth is not cooperating today. These metrics are going to have your goals, your outcomes, your objectives. You have to have clearly stated goals for your project. And for some of these activity types, you will trigger section 3. So you're going to need your metrics for section 3, total labor hours, and targeted section 3 labor hours as well, if section 3 is triggered. Your narrative is also going to include the project timeline and status. Oops, sorry about that. You want to make sure that you explain the current status of your project as well as the proposed timeline. So here's where you're going to explain sort of the lifespan of the project, provide estimated start and end dates for your project, and describe the steps you're going to be taking towards environmental review, which will be explored in more detail in the next session of the cohort series. And then finally, subrecipients, you want to describe why your project may best be implemented by subrecipients if you're planning to use a subrecipient in the process. You want to describe their roles and the scope that they'll be handling. So again, there's no prescribed format for your narrative, but you want to make sure that you're covering all these topics in your narrative. And if you have other questions or you're looking for more details, you can always consult the fiscal year 23 CPF guide that has additional instructions on the narrative. And you can also refer back to the session 1 slides from the cohort series. All right, and with that, I will turn it over to Stan to begin our
Great.
conversation on budget.
Wonderful, thank you. I'm trying to share. Let's see.
Looks
All
good.
right, looks good. All right, thank you, Jennifer. So let's talk about some budget basics because that's why we're here. So the CPF does require you to submit a line item budget with your grant agreement. We're going to talk about line items in a minute. It must include uses for the entire project, not just the CPF part, not just the part you're paying for with CPF. And it needs to match the CPF funds in your budget needs to match the CPF award. So round up, round down, do whatever you need to do, but the amount of funds in your budget from CPF needs to match your amount of funds that you were awarded. Okay. All right. The budget also has to be consistent with the project narrative and the joint explanatory statement. We've got the link here for you for the FY23 awards. But for example, if your CPF award included construction, your budget needs to include construction. If it included acquisition of a building, your budget needs to include an acquisition of a building. If you put something in that's very inconsistent with the joint explanatory statement, you'll get questions back from your grant officer. So we want to make sure that it's consistent with what's in that joint explanatory statement and consistent with your narrative. So the narrative, we cover the narrative first because the narrative says what you're going to do. The budget says how you're going to pay for it. Okay, so if you've already got a budget that's in Excel or Word format, you can use that. And really by Excel or Word, we mean spreadsheet or word processing document. It doesn't have to be Excel or Word. It could be a Google Doc. But if you've already got one, you can use that. You also can, not required, but can use the forms that is part of the HUD's grants.gov, the SF 424, which is for non-construction, 424B, and 424D, which is for construction programs. So if you don't have a budget already formatted and done for what you're paying for, you can use the forms that HUD has already created for submitting budgets and for construction and non-construction across all their programs. Okay. All right. So, all right, it's time for a poll. And Jennifer, I think you've got the controls.
I do. Let me get that up for you.
Okay.
1 second here. All right, so we are going to launch poll number 1.
All right.
Do you see it, Stan?
Yes, it's going. People are responding.
Great. Oh yes, lots of responses rolling in. So the budget must include uses for the entire project with the CPF and non-CPF funds identified separately. Would you say this is true or false?
We still have a few more responding. All right.
Okay, so I'll end the poll here.
Okay. So yes, this is true. Everyone got that one right. And to answer a question that came up in the chat, so you're going to have a budget, and we'll see in a minute, you can have 2 columns, CPF funds, non-CPF funds. The total of your CPF funds column has to equal your award amount.
Great.
All right.
Good job on that one, everyone.
Yes. Next.
All right, I'll go back to the next question here. All right, make sure I pull the right one. All right, our next question is ready. SF 424 forms for budget information for construction and non-construction projects. A may be used as a template for submitting CPF budget information. B may be used as a template for, must be used as a template for submitting CPF budget information, or C cannot be used as the template. So the SF-424 forms, are they a template that you may, must, or cannot use for your budget? Folks are thinking a little more carefully in answering this question.
Mhm.
The results are rolling in a little bit slower. I'll give you another few seconds to answer, and then we'll end this poll and see what we've got. Okay. All right, let's see.
All right. So almost 90% of you got this one. They may be used as a template. They do not have to be used for a template. So it's A is the correct answer. They may be used. But if you already have your budget done in another format, you don't have to transfer it to these funds. If you haven't started, you can use these forms.
Great. All right, and our last question here. We've got 1 second. I'm the right one. All right. Let's switch around the order here. Oops.
You got it. We're seeing it.
Okay, I think it ended. I accidentally ended the poll though. Sorry about that, guys. Let's see. So go ahead and think about this question.
Yes, we'll answer it in a second.
Yes. So the question is true or false? The budget does not need to be consistent with the narrative, nor the joint explanatory statement, provided the budget includes an explanation of the differences. Is that true or false?
All right, so that's one of the more false things I've ever written. The budget does need to be consistent with the narrative, and it has to be consistent with the joint explanatory statement, which we have that link for on one of the slides that you'll get. So it must be consistent with both the narrative and the joint explanatory statement that Congress gave us. All right.
All right. Great. Thanks, everyone, for participating in the poll.
Okay. All right. So what else? Oh, look, we have a budget. All right. This is fun. So this is the SF-424. I have modified it a little bit to put CPF funds, non-CPF funds, and a total, right? Just quickly covering what some of these mean. And I want to pause here for a minute and say that we've you're going to be get by email, but it's also available where you register for this through that Absorb program, that Absorb platform. We have this construction budget format and a non-construction board format in Excel. We also have the instructions, the line item instructions that forms.gov has generated for us. And what we'd like you to do between now and office hours, if you haven't already done it, is create your budget. And by next week, if you have questions, you can come to the office hours and ask them. So administrative and legal, it's going to be your admin cost. It's going to be any legal expenses you have for your project. Land structure, right-of-ways, appraisals. If you're buying something, if you're buying land or buying a building, this is where you would put this amount. If you are buying a building and you're going to make people move and you're going to have to relocate them, you're going to have put your relocation expenses and payments here. Architectural and engineering fees. We're going to need an estimate of what our architectural and engineering fees are going to be. So there should be someone on your team that can help you figure out what the likely architectural and engineering costs are going to be for your project. Funders require inspections. Lenders definitely require inspections. You will likely have someone on your team that'll be representing you in a construction project that you want to do inspections to make sure the work is being done as you want it and making sure it's being done to the specs you want. So that's where we would put this cost. When we do construction, we always have to do site work, grading, removing some trees, perhaps, doing geotech work, testing the soil, bringing in any additional soil fill might need. This would be where you would put that amount. If we're going to tear something down and get rid of it, we would put in an amount for demolition and removal. Again, where us or someone on our team will be able to give us an estimate of what the demolition cost would be. Construction, building the thing. Whatever you're building, this is the actual cost of building it. It's going to be hard cost and soft cost in this line. If you're buying any equipment for your project, you would put that there. Miscellaneous, you'll want to list what the miscellaneous are, but it's anything that doesn't fit in one of these categories 1 through 10. When we do construction, we always have a contingency because things go wrong. They especially go wrong if you're doing rehab, but they also, costs can change. Something that was unanticipated could show up. So we always have a contingency. Typically for construction, with new construction, it's 5%. Typically with rehab, it's 10%. One of the rules we have to follow is that our costs need to be necessary and reasonable. So if we kind of stay within that range of 5% for new construction, 10% for rehab, we have some evidence that that's a fair range. That's necessary and reasonable. If we have any program income we're expecting that would count to our program income, we would subtract that from our subtotal. Otherwise, it is the total project cost in line 16 is our total of lines 1 through 11. Okay. Non-construction, personnel. So if you've got someone that's going to spend 50% of their time on this project, just so I can do the math in my head in front of 50 people, we have someone who makes $100,000 a year, 50% of their time is going to be on this, then we would have 50% of their cost would be in personnel. Fringe benefits, as employers, we pay for FICA, which is Social Security and Medicare, retirement, vacation. We would include all that time into this amount. And if they're only working 50% of the time, we would divide that amount by 50%. Travel, if there's travel, if you're going to be affiliated with your project, any equipment. Equipment is typically either is the greater of what your agency says is equipment, or something that's going to last more than a year and cost more than $5,000. So it's the lower of those, either $5,000, or if your agency or your local government says equipment is $2,500, then it's $2,500. Supplies are things that aren't equipment. So paper clips, Post-its, but really things that are below $5,000 or your equipment cutoff. So generally speaking, most computers are less than $5,000. Computers are supplies. If you're going to go into a contract with someone to help implement this, that's where we put the contractual and that amount in contractual. If we're going to do any other things, we would list them. Anything that's not in A through F, we're going to list them and put the amounts. We're then going to total that up, and that's going to be our direct charge. We're going to talk about indirect charges in a minute, but that amount goes in I, and then we sum up the totals for both the CPF and the non-CPF. Okay. All right. It's not moving. Okay, so I said we talk about indirect costs. So let's talk about indirect costs. It's cost incurred for a common or joint purpose. It's benefiting more than one cost objective, and it's not readily assignable to the cost objective specifically benefited without effort disproportionate to the results. All right, what does that mean in English? Okay, so personnel, or a better one, accounting, your finance department. With finance, yeah, we could make our finance person track every entry that they did in the finance system divide that by the total number of entries and get what percent of their time was actually spent on this. But that's something that's not readily assignable. And that would be effort disproportionate to the results achieved. So we aren't required to track that. Same thing you could say for personnel. Okay, yeah, we make the poor HR person every minute she spends talking with someone about the CPF grant, they could track that. We could charge her time directly. But really, again, the personnel department is going to benefit more than one cost objective, and it's not readily assignable. So what are our choices? How do we cover these costs? So some of you may have been around long enough to have an indirect cost rate, a negotiated indirect cost rate. Most of them, in my experience, seem to have been done like 60s and 70s. A lot of community action agencies have indirect cost rates. So if you have an indirect cost rate, you can use your indirect cost rate for the CPF, your CPF award. If you don't, which I'm guessing is going to be many of you, then you can use the de minimis rate, which is 10% of your modified total direct cost. What is included in the modified direct cost is explicitly listed in 2 CFR Part 200.414. That would be a lot easier for y'all to look at that rather than me walk through all the variations of that. But basically, it's the direct cost minus supplies, minus a few other things. And 10% of that amount you can use to cover these indirect costs that are not, again, we get the right language in front of me, not readily assignable to the cost objectives and without effort disproportionate to the results. Some common ones: general administration, personnel, finance, which we talked about, telephone, office supplies, office rent, office building security services, things that are hard to assign directly to the CPF award. Okay, and then for more information on that, on the CPF site, on the HUD Exchange, there is a supplemental information on indirect cost. So I know it's kind of hard to listen, take notes, and then remember what you wrote down and what the context was. But here is additional information on the HUD Exchange, on the CPF page, supplemental information on indirect cost. Okay, we can amend our budget, which is a good thing because costs change, things change. We may have thought we were going to spend money on something and we're not. Something may have gone up from the time we did our budget to the time we started our activities. So changes to an approved budget are permitted. To do this, you would submit a revised budget, so the new budget showing the changes, and a letter on your letterhead to your grant officer explaining why you need to change the budget. So in this letter, it's going to have the justification for the change, a detailed explanation of how the change is still consistent with congressional intent, and an explanation of why the change is needed. Now, you can continue to draw money while your budget's being amended. You can't just draw the amended amount. So if you had construction costs that you weren't changing, but you were changing something else, equipment or supplies or anything else that you're changing, you could still draw from construction, but you couldn't draw on the things that you were changing, if that makes sense. Okay, and Jennifer, I think this is you.
Sorry, had myself on mute. This is me. And before we get into this, should we take some budget questions, Stan, or do you want to save this for the end?
As long as there are ones that I can answer, sure.
Well, if they aren't, we
have a plan. Okay.
We have a plan if they aren't ones that we can answer today. So I'm gonna scroll through here and somebody, just to point out, someone asked where the joint explanatory statement is. And so if y'all are looking for that, there is a link for it in the chat now. So you can find that there.
Great.
Somebody asked, if I have a $1 million if I have a $1 million grant, is 5% of that supposed to be going to contingencies, or does the grant recipient pay the 5% contingencies?
No, it would come out of your total budget, but your contingency can come either from the CPF award or from any other sources you're using, but it's not 5% of your award. It's 5% of your hard construction cost, and another 5% for your soft construction cost. So it's based on the construction amount, not your award amount.
Make money.
On this direct deposit form,
Mm-hmm.
okay, I signed your name on it.
Thank you. Okay, another question asked. This person actually had two questions. The first question was, if a building is being purchased without any construction or change in the land use, would this be considered a non-construction project?
And I would say yes, but usually when you buy a building, you're doing something. They're usually never in move-in condition. But if you're buying it and absolutely doing nothing to it, well, we might have to hold that one, because there's not really a place for acquisition in the non-construction budget, and it's really aimed more at the services. I don't know if Connor has any insight on that, but I think that you would use the construction budget. You would need the line item for acquisition in there. And remember, and I guess I would have to ask too, what else you're doing. If the rest of what you're doing is non-construction, you're running a program, then I think you would use the non-construction and add acquisition to that. If you're doing, if you're buying this and that's all you're doing, you're not using CPF money or anything else, all you're doing is the project is just acquiring this building, which I'm struggling to think how that would work, then I guess you could use the non-construction and add that. But remember, those forms are not required. They're guidance for you that cover that as a template that you can use. So I would think I would want to know what the other activities I'm doing in addition to acquiring this building, and then I would decide whether it's non-construction or which form to use. So if I had a lot of costs that were personnel and fringe benefits and service stuff that's on that non-construction one, you could use those line items and add in acquisition for acquiring the building.
Thank you, Sam. Second part of that question was, a previous webinar mentioned adding the environmental review costs to the soft cost. Would this go into indirect?
No, it would be direct. It's a direct cost. It would be an other cost. It could be part of your construction. You can do more details. You can provide more details on your budget that's on those forms. I think that's part of the reason those forms aren't required, is that you can absolutely add more in, but it would be part of your soft cost. Environmental review is part of your soft cost.
Thank you. Someone asked, does planning only projects equal non-construction?
I'm going to say yes, but also look at those line item descriptions and see if you're doing anything else that's different. But yes, I would use that as I think the line items in the non-construction budget would match something if you're only doing planning.
Right. Someone asked about what information would be needed to request payment for indirect costs.
Well, the beauty of doing that de minimis rate and those rates is you don't have to provide additional documentation. And that's in 2 CFR part 200.400, 414, I believe was the exact reference. So yeah, you when you use the de minimis rate, there's no additional documentation that's needed.
And I will drop, somebody asked about adding to the chat, the website link for the resource on the indirect cost slide. So we'll get that, we'll drop that into the chat.
Yeah, when I stop sharing, Jennifer, I'll go grab it.
Okay, great. Someone asked for some additional examples of soft versus hard costs.
Okay. Hard costs generally are the hard construction cost, building and your profit and overhead for your builder. Soft cost is all the other stuff you have to pay for: architectural and engineering, surveys, appraisals, general conditions, usually general conditions for the developer, where they get money for doing having the trailer on site if you're doing a big project, or for the porta potties, just those are kind of things. I mentioned appraisals, surveys, soil test, environmental review, things that are not in hard construction costs, that are not in, that pretty much is not included in your general contractor's line item for actual construction.
Great. There's actually several questions relating to sources and portions of projects and what goes in the budget. So I'm going to pick out a few and see if
Okay.
that might help answer some of them.
Okay.
So one question asked, if the whole project includes construction, but this funding, CPF, is only covering the planning, do we need to move forward with the construction documents? Do we need to have the whole project planned out for this, or just the portion that the funding is paying for?
Well, what you have to put for the entire budget, you need for the entire project, the CPF and the non-CPF. So that's something that we might want to discuss in more detail in office hours, because I think we need more information on what all is being done and what the project entails before we could really answer that question.
Exactly. Yeah,
So
I
I think we would need to know the JES and the narrative, and then we could help make the decision on what needs to be included in the budget. I don't know if you if you have any other insight, Jennifer.
No, yeah, I agree. I agree with that. I think some of the questions I think that are remaining here would be good office hour questions, because they do get into a little bit more of
Specifics on specific deals,
yeah,
specific circumstances. Yeah.
Yeah, the questions aren't super specific, but the sort of the nuance of it the answer might be. So let's see.
Might depend on what the specifics of the narrative are.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
like this
okay.
question asks, so the budget needs to include CPF and non-CPF funding, but the expenses need to add up to exactly the CPF grant award. Is that the accurate understanding?
No. The CPF column needs to add up to CPF total. But the other costs for the project are going to equal the total project cost. But it's that CPF column in your budget needs to match your award amount.
You're going to include all your sources, all your expenses, and just to make sure that what you're using your CPF for matches your award amount.
Right.
So somebody asked, shouldn't we include more proposed CPF costs than the grant amount in case some of our costs are not allowable?
If your CPF is more than your expenses, your grant officer is going to send it back to you, has been my experience so far. So no.
Yeah, and vice versa.
If they're not allowable, yeah, I'm sorry, but before I forget, if they're not allowable, your grant officer is going to let you know, and you're going to figure out what you're going to do, what cost you're going to move in order to be allowable. But there's, a lot of things are allowable.
Yeah. So you're going to make sure that your costs are allowable. The whole point of putting together the budget is to make it balance. And so doing that thoughtful work of ensuring that you're choosing eligible costs up front. Okay. So I think we've answered the spirit of most of these questions. If for some reason we didn't, we have office hours coming up, or if it's a really burning question and you feel like we didn't cover it in either in your question directly or in some of the other questions that were asked, because as I said, I think some of them sort of overlapped in terms of the topic area. Go ahead and drop it back down into the chat, and if I see it pop up again, I'll know that you feel like we need to cover it in a little more detail.
We did you wrong. Yeah.
Right. So please go ahead and do that. Let's see.
All right, I'm gonna stop sharing, Jennifer, and you can grab it. You ready?
Great. Yeah, that sounds great.
All right.
All right. On my screen now, get these slides back up. Can you see it in larger than life form
Yep,
there, Stan?
larger
All
than
right.
life. Yeah, you're
Awesome, thank
good.
you. All right, so we're going to talk just a little bit about DRGR just because DRGR is how you're going to be able to access your dollars. And that is the ultimate goal so that you can get your projects underway. And a lot of what you're doing now in terms of creating your narratives and your budget is going to end up in DRGR eventually. So we give you this as a preview. Know that there are many other resources available to walk you through what's required in DRGR, but we like to give people sort of a preview so that you know what's coming. So after the approval of the narrative and budget, once you get your grant agreement in place, you're going to be setting up your projects and activities in DRGR. So the way DRGR works is it's a hierarchical system. You have your grant award, then you have a project, and then you build out activities underneath the project. So it's like these little stacking dolls that you see in this photograph. And the grant is the biggest doll, and then project, and then activity. And then within your activities, that's where you're making your draws. So you create your obligations in your activity, and then you can draw funds at the activity level. So we just kind of like to give you that overall snapshot of the way DRGR works so that once you do get in there to start managing your funds, you'll understand this hierarchy and how all the pieces fit together. In DRGR itself, when you go to create your project and your activities, you are going to see a screen that looks like this. You're going to have separate submenus for projects and activities. There are other ways to get to these different functionalities, but this is a nice little, I like to call it the expressway. You just go right to the menu and you see the little drop downs with the different menu functions. To add your project, you click on the add project link, and then you'll see that you're going to set it up with a project number, title, description, and you're going to give it a budget amount. So your project budget amount is going to go in there. Also, just a quick note that on the HUD Exchange, there is a DRGR quick guide, and that quick guide will be supplemented over time as more information is made available, as DRGR functionality is enhanced. That quick guide will be updated as the program goes on. But right now, the quick guide is there and has the information that you need as of right now. There are also videos, wonderful videos on step-by-step instructions for setting up your projects and activities. So fear not, you don't have to muddle through this alone. There is help. But this is what it will look like when you go into DRGR to set up your project. And this is what it'll look like when you set up your activity. So the activity has more fields than the project because in DRGR, the activity level, as we call it, is where the detail lives for the work that you're doing. It is also where you draw your funds. All funds are drawn at the activity level. And so this is the level where we ask for the most information in DRGR. So, you're going to add, you're going to connect it to a project, the project that you just set up. You're going to give it an activity type. You're going to fill out all the required fields. Your activity names and numbers, those are your own naming conventions. You're going to describe your activity here. Oops, sorry about that. And then you're going to establish your budget. So that's what this screen is going to look like. And again, there's a video that walks you through step by step how you set up your activity. So it's a great resource. Here are the videos that are available on the HUD Exchange. There's a little screenshot of the HUD Exchange page where you can go to access those videos. So there's a video on how to submit your action plan, how to add activities, how to add responsible organizations. Every activity that gets set up in DRGR needs a responsible organization linked to it. So that video is going to show you how to set up a responsible organization. There's a video on how to establish your project, how to set performance and accomplishment measures. Remember, we talked about in the session 1 of the cohort series, they walked through metrics. And so those metrics that you've established, they do get recorded in DRGR. So you're going to be setting up your performance and accomplishment measures in DRGR as well. And then there is also a video on how to add and change users. So this is more user management. You're going to need at least 2 users for DRGR because when you make draws, one requests the draw and the other approves the draw. So at a minimum, you need at least 2 DRGR users. And this video is going to show you how you can add and change users. So more to come on DRGR as the program rolls forward, but this information is more than enough to get you started. So definitely go ahead and check out that page. All right. So again, we have office hours coming up on February 13th. That is a wonderful opportunity for you to bring your more detailed questions. And I think, you know, some of the questions that we talked about today are great candidates for further follow-up in that office hours session. You know, it's not limited to that. If you have others that you think of after digesting some of the information that we reviewed today, that would be great. And I think Stan had a little bit of a homework assignment for everybody.
Right. So where are you registered on the Absorb, and also there'll be emailed to you will be the forms that we showed for construction and non-construction. What we'd like to ask you to do is between now and February 13th, if you haven't done it already, work on your budget. And if you're starting to have some questions about certain line items or how to fill it out, bring them to the office hours. And that way we'll have us, Jennifer and I, there to help work with you on answering your questions, your more project specific questions. A lot of them we may have to get into more details about what exactly you're doing, which is why we struggle a little bit to answer in this, because we really need to understand the narrative part and the JES part to really to possibly be able to answer your questions.
Absolutely. So yeah, take advantage of that time. Do some work between now and the 13th on your budget if you haven't already. If you have already started, apply some of the information that you learned today to tidy up the budget, get it a little cleaner, a little tighter, and then come to the office hours with your questions or ready to share to see if, hey, does this sound right? It's a great opportunity to do an initial check before you get the materials submitted. So we've got some questions and answer time here. Let me take a look at the chat and see what else may have come in.
Okay, and I'm going to answer one that Connor answered. I want to make sure everyone sees it. It's about the order of things. So you submit your grant package to your grant officer. Once approved, you'll get an executed grant agreement. Once you have the executed grant agreement, DRGR access is granted, and then you'll be setting up your action plan in DRGR. So it's after you get through the executed grant agreement signed and sent back to you is when you'll get your DRGR access to set this up.
Yes.
Thanks, Stan. And I wanted to say one more thing too. The user that we set up in DRGR is going to be whatever person is listed as the authorized representative on the SF424. So that person will receive a DRGR account, and then once they're into DRGR, that person that has access first will have the functionality to add additional staff members to DRGR and give them the various permissions in DRGR that they'll need to administer the grant. So one person, the authorized representative, gets set up first, and then they need to go into DRGR themselves and then add all of your other users. And again, that all happens after your grant package is submitted and approved and you received a fully executed grant agreement, meaning that it is signed by both your organization and the Congressional Grants Division.
Thank you, Connor, for that timeline. So as you all can see, for some of you, that may be several weeks away, or perhaps even longer. But I think, understanding the direction that you're heading with all of that is helpful. Thank you for clarifying all of that. Somebody asked, what does DRGR stand for? Which is a great question. It stands for Disaster Recovery Grant Reporting System. This system was originally developed to manage CDB GDR grants, but has grown to encompass about a dozen different HUD programs. And so it's used to manage many HUD programs, not just disaster recovery. Let's see. All right, we've got that question answered. And then somebody asked, why are our grants under DRGR? Yeah, the reason why is that the system is really, really adaptable. It's for the programmers, it's easy for them to modify the system to fit other grants. And so HUD has been using DRGR as a way to manage new grant programs that come along. All right, and how do we get contact information updated? The city manager listed in the award is no longer there. Connor, what would they do?
Yeah, so you have a few different options. What I would first recommend doing, if you haven't already done it, is to contact your grant officer directly and just say that you would like to update, your authorized representative. And then if they need any additional information from you, they'll just request it. That would be the simplest answer. If you're having trouble getting in contact with your grant officer, specifically about getting an updated contact, I would send an email to the CPF grants email address, which I can put in the chat in a second. And just put your name, your grant number, the organization you're representing, and just simply say that you're looking to update your contact information. That'll go to your grant officer, and then we'll update our internal system to have you to have that change reflected.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I can put in the email address in just a second in the chat.
Perfect. Someone else asked.
I was just going to add, I added the indirect cost info link. I put it in earlier, but I added it again, so it's at the bottom now.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Jennifer, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh, no, that's great. Thank you for that, Stan. That is something that folks wanted. Somebody had asked about name change questions, so I would follow that same process that Connor just described for the change in contact information. So just go ahead and message that email address that Connor's going to drop into the chat. To the extent that we have not answered any questions here today, we will compile them from this chat and send them along to HUD. But Connor, if someone feels that they haven't received an answer and they'd like one before office hours, or if they can't attend office hours next week, if they're not available, what would you suggest in terms of helping them out with the questions that they might have?
Sure. I think it's okay if it's okay with you guys, TDA. It may be good to refer some questions to and correct me if I'm wrong, if it's not the right email, just that Cohorts email.
Yeah.
And okay, and if TDA has the know-how to answer it, they can follow back up with you. Or if it's a more complex question, they can shoot the question over to the Congressional Grants Division, and we'll reach out to you separately to get you more detailed information on what you're asking. And alternatively, of course, we mentioned it before, but there is that that HUD CPF AAQ on the HUD exchange. We also recommend that grantees use that for general programmatic questions about CPF. Often the turnaround time for getting those programmatic questions answered is very quick. So if you're having trouble getting in contact with your grant officer, that's an avenue to get answers as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you have several options. So just to sort of recap those options, go ahead and email us at that email address that you've been getting your information from for the cohorts at tdainc.org. You can funnel your questions that come out of these cohort sessions to that email address, and then we will compile them, answer the ones that we can. If we can't, we'll refer them on to HUD. In addition to that, you can use the AAQ. We went over the AAQ resource early on in the slides. So that's another way to get answers to questions about the CPF program. And you access that through the HUD Exchange. And then for those of you who have contact information or name change information, Connor put the process in the chat. So you want to contact your grant officer first for any updates that you need to make for your contact or authorized people or organizational name, any of those informational change type things. You want to contact your grant officer first. If the grant officer isn't able to help, then you want to email the CPF grants at hud.gov to inform HUD of these contact or authorized representative changes or name changes. There are several questions in that sort of theme. So I just want to kind of go over how you can get your questions answered and then who you contact for that type of informational change that you need to make related to your grant. And
I guess one question was about what drives emphasis on distinguishing construction versus non-construction projects. It's the way that HUD forms.gov or grants.gov rather is set up. And with CPF, we're allowed to use those formats, not required. So if you are doing acquiring a building and most of your costs are related to that and not much related to personnel or fringe benefit costs, you could use the construction cost. You're just trying to make sure the budget form you're using matches the expenses that you plan to have.
thank you.
We did have a few questions that are not related to budget, so those are the ones that we'll follow up with, as Jennifer, as you were talking about.
Yeah. And then Connor answered the question about sort of timing on getting your grant package to your grant officer. Once that's approved, then you get your grant agreement, and then you get your DRGR access after the grant agreement is executed. And so someone had a question later asking if they send their grant agreement in with their project narrative and budget, and no, you don't. That's going to come after. Once that project narrative and budget is approved, then you'll get your grant agreement to execute.
Just to clarify really quick, I'm in that process. When I say grant agreement, I mean an executed grant agreement. So when you get your grant package to fill out and submit to your grant officer, you probably have received a grant agreement that is unexecuted. That it basically means that it hasn't been executed. So once you submit everything, then you'll get that grant agreement back where both parties have signed, and then it's fully executed.
Gotcha. There you go. Thank you. Okay. Excellent. So as we talked about, slides will be available on the HUD Exchange. Some of this information is also available in Absorb. Somebody had asked about how you access Absorb. If you have a question about Absorb, definitely email the cohorts@tdainc.org account, and they will help you through the process of accessing Absorb if you haven't already done that, or if you need some help navigating where to find things in that system. Right. So again, just to recap, we've got office hours coming up on the 13th. You can submit questions to cohorts@tdainc.org. You can also use the AAQ for anything that we didn't cover here or that comes to mind later. We will comb through this chat log, pull out any questions that we feel like we didn't cover, and make a list of those and get answers back to folks. So if you don't hear, again, use that Cohorts email box or use the AAQ just to make sure that, you know, we're getting folks what you need. So we would also love for your feedback on the evaluation survey. This is really important for us in terms of making sure that these cohort sessions are what you need. We're only halfway through this series, so your feedback is particularly valuable at this stage because we still have time to adjust if a different approach or format would be helpful. If you need more information on certain things, there's still some time to adjust as we go forward. So please use this evaluation opportunity. When you get the survey link from the cohorts@tdainc.org email address, just click on that link. It doesn't take very long, but it is super helpful for you. Right, and with that, we thank you for joining us today. Any final words, Stan or Connor?
I don't think so.
No, I don't think so. Thanks everyone for attending. Really appreciate it. We're really happy that and hope that this session was useful to you. Please attend the other sessions on forms and environmental review that are coming up. And of course, please attend the office hour sessions. Those are really great opportunities to workshop questions that are related to the previous sessions that were covered. And we can get a little more in depth on some of the more complex questions. And those office hours will have some grant officers attending. So you may even run into your grant officer and have them answer some of your questions on those office hour sessions. So really hope that you can attend. Thanks for coming, and we really appreciate you. Thanks.
Thank you all. Have a great day.